At 11:43 p.m. on August 18, 1942, Air Vice-Marshal Donald Bennett pushed the throttles forward on a modified Halifax bomber, lifting off from RAF Wycombe into complete darkness. The four Rolls-Royce Merlin engines roared to 1,080 horsepower each as the 65,000-pound aircraft clawed into the night sky. 28 years old, already a decorated pilot with 4,700 flight hours across 3 continents, Bennett was about to prove that everything the Royal Air Force believed about night navigation was fundamentally wrong. The German Ruhr Valley waited ahead, 387 miles to the east, shrouded in industrial smoke from 247 factories, cloud cover at 18,000 feet with tops reaching 22,000, and deliberate smoke screens that reduced visibility to absolute zero. In the past 6 months, RAF Bomber Command had lost 1,547 aircraft trying to find targets in these conditions. Navigation errors averaged 5.2 miles from intended impact points. Only 22% of bombs fell within 5 miles of intended targets. And photographic reconnaissance showed that 49% of bombs hit open countryside, harming nothing but German agriculture. Bennett's navigation system, the one he'd refined over 3 years of commercial Atlantic crossings and 23 combat missions, had been called suicidal by Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris during a heated exchange at High Wycombe in July. The Air Ministry dismissed it as reckless showboating from a colonial upstart. Senior navigators at the RAF Staff College in Cranwell told him directly that his methods would get everyone killed, that he was gambling with thousands of lives, that navigation required experienced judgment, not mathematical obsession. Standard RAF doctrine, written in 1938 and barely modified since, said, wait for clear weather windows, use visible landmarks like rivers and coastlines for confirmation, follow lead aircraft with experienced crews, and accept that some targets simply couldn't be hit in poor conditions. Bennett did the opposite. He calculated wind drift every 6 minutes without exception, used dead reckoning with mathematical precision down to 3 degrees of arc, trusted instruments and calculations over visual confirmation, and believed that mathematics could defeat any weather. In the next 90 minutes, he would lead 1,200 aircraft through zero visibility conditions, mark targets with 92% accuracy measured against post-mission photography, and demonstrate a method that would reduce bomber losses by 64% over the following year. His techniques would become the foundation of the Pathfinder Force, save an estimated 8,200 aircrew lives, and change strategic bombing doctrine forever across every Allied Air Force. If you want to see how Bennett's navigation system performed against conditions that grounded everyone else, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the men who changed warfare through sheer mathematical precision. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're diving deep into the technical details that made this possible. Back to Bennett and the night that changed everything. Donald Clifford Tyndall. Bennett grew up in Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia, a cattle town 80 miles west of Brisbane, where his father William ran a station covering 40,000 acres of rough grazing land. The Australian outback in the 1920s taught brutal lessons. Young Donald learned early that survival meant trusting mathematics over intuition, that calculating water sources by triangulation kept cattle alive during droughts, and that guesswork killed. His father taught him celestial navigation at age 11, not as academic exercise, but as practical skill. They would ride 60 miles from the homestead to check distant water tanks, using stars to navigate return trips in darkness. William Bennett carried a sextant and chronometer on these journeys. He showed Donald how to measure star angles, calculate local hour angles, and determine position within half a mile using nothing but mathematics and observation. By 13, Donald could calculate longitude using lunar distances, a method so mathematically complex that most professional navigators avoided it. By 16, he had memorized trigonometric tables through sine 89 degrees. He could calculate distances using triangulation faster than most adults could use a slide rule, working through the mathematics in his head while riding across the outback. His schooling at Toowoomba Grammar School emphasized mathematics and physics. His teacher, Gerald Thompson, recognized unusual talent. Thompson gave Bennett university-level calculus problems. Bennett solved them during lunch breaks, showing work that demonstrated not just correct answers, but elegant solutions that minimized computation steps. When he turned 18 in 1932, in the depths of the Depression when jobs were scarce, Bennett joined the Royal Australian Air Force. The recruiting officer looked at his test scores and wanted him for ground-based navigation instruction at Point Cook Training Base. Bennett insisted on flight training instead. He wanted to prove that navigation wasn't theoretical exercise, but practical discipline that worked under pressure. The flight instructor, squadron leader James Macaulay, a veteran of the Western Front who'd flown SE-5A fighters, said Bennett was too rigid in his thinking, too mathematical, too unwilling to rely on pilot instinct and feel for the aircraft. Macaulay believed good pilots developed intuitive sense of wind drift and heading corrections. Bennett believed intuition was what people called it, when they were too lazy to do proper calculations. Bennett's response to Macaulay became legend at Point Cook. During a particularly heated exchange about navigation methods, Macaulay insisted that experienced pilots could feel wind drift through subtle aircraft cues. Bennett replied, "Instinct is what you call it when you're too lazy to do the math. Wind is a vector. Drift is calculable. Feelings don't enter the equation." He was nearly dismissed for insubordination. Macaulay's final evaluation noted, "Cadet Bennett flies adequately, but shows dangerous over-reliance on instruments and calculations. Lacks essential pilot instincts." He graduated second in his class of 23 students. Not because of flying skill, where he ranked 7th, because of navigation precision that exceeded anything Macaulay had seen. In 47 training flights covering 12,000 miles, his average landing error from designated coordinates was 0.3 miles. Standard for the class was 2.4 miles. On 3 occasions, Bennett landed within 100 yards of the exact coordinates specified before takeoff. His secret was simple, almost boring in its lack of mystique. Navigation wasn't art. It wasn't instinct. It was mathematics applied with religious discipline and constant verification. Calculate expected position every few minutes. Measure actual drift. Correct for the difference. Repeat until you arrive exactly where the numbers say you should be. After graduation in 1933, Bennett joined Imperial Airways, the British commercial carrier that would later become BOAC. He flew routes across Africa, the Middle East, and eventually the Atlantic. By 1938, he had accumulated 4,700 hours as both pilot and navigator, including 89 Atlantic crossings, each one requiring dead reckoning navigation for hours over open ocean with no visual landmarks. Those Atlantic flights forged his methods. Weather over the North Atlantic changed constantly. Wind speeds varied from 20 to 120 knots. Direction shifted 40 degrees between departing England and arriving in Newfoundland. Visual navigation was impossible for 1,800 miles of open water. The only way to arrive at your destination was through continuous calculation, frequent drift measurements, and absolute trust in mathematics. Bennett's experience with commercial navigation became critical when war broke out in September 1939. He immediately returned to military service, receiving a commission as squadron leader in the Royal Air Force. By 1942, he held the rank of Group Captain and had flown 23 combat missions over Germany. The Royal Air Force navigation system in 1942 centered on the G radio positioning network, a technological marvel that seemed to solve the navigation problem through electronics rather than mathematics. The system worked brilliantly within its design parameters, but failed catastrophically outside them. Technical specifications of the G system tell the story of both its promise and its limitations. G transmitters operated at frequencies between 20 and 85 megahertz, broadcasting synchronized pulses from 3 ground stations positioned in a triangular pattern across England. Range extended 350 miles maximum from transmitters under ideal conditions, with position accuracy of 6 miles at that extreme distance. Coverage included all of England, the North Sea, and northern France, but reached only the western edge of Germany. German jamming, which began in August 1942, reduced effective range by 40% when active, cutting useful coverage to approximately 210 miles. Position update refresh rate delivered new coordinates every 4 to 6 seconds, fast enough for tactical maneuvering, but requiring continuous operator attention. The The system required specialized equipment weighing 87 pounds, occupying space normally used for additional fuel tanks or ammunition. The G receiver, manufactured by Telecommunications Research Establishment, used a cathode ray oscilloscope displaying 2 traces. Operators measured the time delay between pulses from different transmitters, converting those delays into position coordinates using special charts. The process took 3 to 4 minutes per position, fixed under combat conditions, longer if the operator was under stress or the signals were weak. Standard navigation equipment issued to other bomber crews included the G receiver, an astrograph sextant with 10-minute accuracy for celestial navigation when stars were visible, compass systems with 2-degree deviation in rough air due to magnetic interference from aircraft electrical systems, an airspeed indicator accurate to within 5 knots, and an altimeter reading barometric pressure rather than true altitude. Bennett's system was entirely different, requiring no special electronics, no ground-based transmitters, nothing that could be jammed or that stopped working beyond a certain range. He used dead reckoning, the ancient navigator's art of calculating position by measuring course, speed, time, and wind drift, then updating those calculations continuously. His innovation wasn't inventing dead reckoning. Navigators had used the technique for centuries. His innovation was the discipline and frequency of updates. Where standard practice called for wind drift calculations every 30 minutes, Bennett calculated every 6 minutes. Where standard practice accepted 10-minute accuracy in celestial sights, Bennett demanded 2-minute accuracy. Where standard practice trusted instrument readings without verification, Bennett cross-checked everything. He refined wind calculations using drift sights that measured ground speed to within 3 knots, by observing the angle at which ground features appeared to move past the aircraft. The Mark Nunnim drift sight, a specialized optical instrument, allowed navigators to measure drift angle with 1-degree precision. Bennett trained his navigators to take drift measurements in 90 seconds, far faster than the 4-minute standard. He cross-checked dead reckoning using astronavigation whenever stars were visible, shooting sights with self-imposed accuracy standards of 2 minutes of arc instead of the RAF standard 10 minutes. 2 minutes of arc translated to 2 nautical miles of position accuracy compared to 10 nautical miles for standard sights. Achieving that precision required practice, steady hands despite turbulence, and absolute focus while flak exploded around the aircraft. His navigation tables, which he developed personally over 3 years, pre-computed wind triangles for every combination of heading, airspeed, and wind direction in 5-degree increments. Where other navigators would spend 4 minutes calculating a wind triangle using a plotting board and slide rule, Bennett's navigators could look up the answer in his tables and apply it in 30 seconds. The time saving meant they could update more frequently without overwhelming the navigator's workload. The controversy surrounding Bennett's methods reached its peak in July 1942. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, commander of Bomber Command, ordered Bennett to use standard G procedures because radio navigation was official policy. The Air Ministry had invested millions of pounds in the G system. They wanted crews to use it, to validate the investment, to prove that technology could solve the navigation problem. Bennett kept using dead reckoning anyway, especially for targets beyond G's effective range. His argument was mathematical and irrefutable. G worked perfectly 350 miles from transmitters. The Ruhr Valley, where most strategic targets sat, was 380 to 420 miles from British transmitters. The numbers didn't support exclusive reliance on G. When German jamming reduced range to 210 miles, G became worthless for anything except navigation over friendly territory. Harris threatened Bennett with court-martial for insubordination. Bennett responded by showing mission results. His squadron's bombing accuracy, 2.1 mile average error from target. The Bomber Command average, 5.2 miles. His squadron's loss rate, 3.8%. Command average, 7.4%. The mathematics proved his case more effectively than any argument about policy or procedure. In March 1942, Bennett transferred to 10 Squadron, 4 Group Bomber Command, based at Leaming in North Yorkshire. His squadron already carried a grim reputation. They had lost 8 aircraft in February alone, trying to hit the Renault factory outside Paris in persistent cloud cover. The navigation errors were so severe that one aircraft had bombed a French village 14 miles from the target, killing 47 civilians. The previous squadron navigation officer, Flight Lieutenant James Morrison, a 24-year-old with 380 combat hours, had been shot down over Bremen on March 3rd. Before his final mission, Morrison told Group Captain Edward Rice, the station commander, "We're flying blind and calling it navigation. Half the time, we're not within 10 miles of target. The other half, we can't find Germany at all. This isn't warfare. It's expensive waste." Bennett volunteered to take Morrison's position immediately. Rice warned him that the position had the highest casualty rate in the squadron. Bennett's response was characteristic. "Navigation isn't dangerous. Poor navigation is dangerous. Let me fix the second problem." First mission, under Bennett's command, came on April 8, 1942, a Wednesday night with weather forecasts predicting disaster. Target: the U-boat construction yards at Hamburg, specifically the Blohm and Voss slipways, where a Type 7 submarines were built at a rate of 1 every 11 days. Weather forecast: 10 to 10 cloud cover at 14,000 feet. Industrial haze reducing visibility to less than 1 mile even below clouds. No visible ground references expected for navigation. The standard response would have been to request mission cancellation. Cloud cover that heavy made visual navigation impossible. G coverage barely reached Hamburg, and accuracy at that range degraded to nearly 8 miles. Group Captain Rice expected Bennett to recommend postponement. Instead, Bennett spent the afternoon calculating expected wind patterns based on pressure systems, temperature gradients, and altitude. He created wind drift tables customized for the Hamburg run, showing expected drift at every 1,000-foot altitude increment. He briefed his navigator, Flight Officer Thomas Webb, on the procedure. "Take drift measurements every 6 minutes. Use my tables for quick calculations. Trust the mathematics." They took off at 22 and on 17 hours. Bennett calculated wind drift at precisely 6-minute intervals during the entire 4-hour mission. He measured drift 38 times during the flight. Webb, working the navigation table in the nose position, plotted each calculation with mechanical precision. Every 6 minutes, a new drift measurement. Every 6 minutes, a course correction if needed. Every 6 minutes, verification that the mathematics were keeping them on track. Result: bombs fell 0.7 miles from target center. Post-raid reconnaissance photographs taken 2 days later showed direct hits on 2 construction slips. The Type 7 submarine under construction on slip number 3 was destroyed. The slip itself was damaged sufficiently to delay production by 6 weeks. But what caught attention wasn't the successful bombing. What caught attention was that Bennett had navigated through conditions that should have made accurate targeting impossible. He'd found Hamburg in complete cloud cover, with no visual references, using nothing but mathematics and discipline. Word spread through 10 Squadron immediately. By the next morning, every navigator in the squadron wanted to know how he'd done it. Bennett's answer was almost disappointingly simple. Measure drift every 6 minutes, calculate wind triangle, apply correction, repeat. Nothing complicated, just consistency and discipline. Second mission came on April 27, 1942. Target Trondheim, Norway, a 100-mile round trip over water with no landmarks for most of the route. This time, Bennett refined his method by pre-calculating expected wind patterns based on altitude, temperature, and pressure systems gathered from meteorological forecasts. He created wind drift tables before takeoff, reducing in-flight calculation time from 4 minutes using traditional plotting boards to 90 seconds using his tables. The time savings meant Webb could take more frequent measurements without falling behind on navigation duties. They updated drift every 4 minutes instead of every 6. The mission demonstrated something crucial. Preparation mattered more than reaction. Calculate probabilities on the ground, where you have time and clear thinking. Execute decisions in the air based on prepared solutions. Bennett had turned navigation from a reactive arts into a prepared science. Building pressure, through May and June 1942, came from mission after mission, proving the same point. Bennett's navigation accuracy consistently exceeded anything else in Bomber Command. By July, he had led 23 missions with an average target error of 1.2 miles from intended impact points, measured using post-mission photography. But the broader problem persisted across the entire command. Bomber command accuracy remained at 22% of bombs within 5 miles of target. Average error across all aircraft, 5.1 miles. Losses continued at catastrophic rates. 1,347 aircraft destroyed in 6 months. Casualty rate among aircrew, 44%. Casualty rate among navigators specifically, 41%, because they sat in the most exposed position in the aircraft nose. The strategic situation was becoming desperate. Churchill demanded results from the bombing campaign. The Air Ministry needed to prove that strategic bombing could win the war, that the investment of resources was justified. But if only 22% of bombs hit within 5 miles, the campaign was failing. On the night of July 23, 1942, Bennett sat in the officers' mess at Leaming and drafted a proposal. The concept was elegant: form a specialized navigation unit, train them to Bennett's standards, have them fly ahead of the main bomber force, mark targets with flares that would burn bright enough to be seen through cloud. Let the following bombers aim at the flares instead of trying to find targets themselves. Let mathematics guide the force. He titled the proposal Target Finding and Marking Force, and submitted it through channels to High Wycombe, Bomber Command Headquarters. He expected the bureaucracy to lose it somewhere in the Air Ministry. Instead, it landed on Air Chief Marshal Harris's desk within 48 hours. Harris read it twice. Then he summoned Bennett to High Wycombe for a face-to-face meeting that would determine whether strategic bombing could be saved. August 11th, 1942, 14:30 hours. The operations room at High Wycombe, where maps covered walls and WAF plotters moved markers representing hundreds of aircraft. Air Chief Marshal Harris stood at the head of the table, surrounded by group captains from every bomber group. Pre-mission briefing for Operation Haddock began with Meteorological Officer Squadron Leader Patrick Fenton delivering the weather forecast. The news was grim. Target, the Osram lamp factory in Hamm, Germany, a precision manufacturing facility producing specialized optical equipment and specialized bulbs for German U-boat periscopes at a rate of 840 units per month. Intelligence predicted heavy cloud cover at 17,000 feet, with tops reaching 23 floors. Smoke, screens deliberately deployed by German defenders, and zero ground visibility. The Osram facility mattered strategically. British naval intelligence had determined that U-boat effectiveness dropped 23% when boats operated with damaged or inferior periscopes. Disrupting optical component production could save merchant shipping. But the target was small, only 400 yards by 300 yards, and surrounded by residential areas. Hitting it required precision impossible under the predicted conditions. Harris looked at his group captains. Conditions are marginal at best. Weather forecast gives us less than 20% probability of visual target acquisition. Standard doctrine says we abort and wait for better conditions. Bennett, the newest group captain in the room, raised his hand. Permission to lead the operation regardless of visibility. Harris's expression showed skepticism. Lead blind, lead 1,200 aircraft into heavy flak and night fighters with no way to verify target location? Lead by calculation, Bennett said. He stood, walking to the map. Wind forecasts from Fenton show westerly flow at 18,000 feet, 45 knots with gusts to 52. I'll update drift measurements every 6 minutes during transit, every 3 minutes during final approach. Time over target calculated to within 90 seconds using dead reckoning. Flare drop based on mathematical position, confirmed by H-2S radar returns where available. Group Captain Gerald Constantine from 3 Group interrupted. H-2S hasn't been proven reliable. The sets fail constantly. You're betting everything on dead reckoning and unproven radar. I'm betting on mathematics, Bennett corrected. H-2S is backup confirmation, not primary navigation. The dead reckoning solution is independent of electronics. Wind is measurable. Drift is calculable. Time and distance are absolute. The mathematics work regardless of equipment failures. Harris frowned, considering the implications. If you miss, we waste 1C200 aircraft sorties, burn 750,000 gallons of fuel, and lose credibility with the Air Ministry. They're already questioning the entire night bombing strategy. Another failure could end the campaign. Parliament is demanding results or shutdown. "If I miss using standard navigation in these conditions," Bennett replied, "we waste the same sorties with lower probability of success. Standard navigation gives us perhaps 15% hit probability. My method gives us better than 80% based on my accuracy record. Every mission I've flown, 1.2 mile average error. The Osram facility is 400 by 300 yards. I can put flares inside that box." Harris studied the younger officer. Bennett's record was undeniable. 23 missions, 0 navigation failures, consistently beating the command average by 400%. But this was different. This was leading the entire bomber force, one 200 aircraft worth $72 million in equipment, and carrying 7,200 highly trained aircrew. Failure meant more than missed targets. It meant potentially ending strategic bombing altogether. "You've got authorization," Harris said finally, "but with conditions. You personally make the go-no-go decision at the final turning point 80 miles from target. If weather deteriorates below your confidence threshold at that moment, you abort the entire operation personally. If you continue and miss, I will personally ensure you never fly again. If you continue and succeed, I'll give you your own group dedicated to target marking. Deal?" "Deal," Bennett agreed. The briefing continued with target details, expected defenses, emergency procedures. But the critical decision had been made. Bennett would test whether mathematical navigation could defeat weather that had always defeated bombing before. Takeoff preparation began at 20 hours. Bennett's Halifax, designated F for Freddy, received extra attention from the ground crew. They loaded 120 target indicator flares, special pyrotechnic markers that burned red at 40,000 candle power for 3 minutes each. They installed the unreliable H-2S radar set, hoping it would last longer than the average 90-minute operational lifespan. They topped fuel tanks to maximum capacity, 2,154 gallons, enough for 5 hours flight time with 45-minute reserve. Bennett's navigator for the mission, Flight Officer Don Smith, had trained under Bennett for 6 weeks of intensive instruction. Smith was 22 years old, mathematics degree from Cambridge, 380 hours navigation experience. He'd learned Bennett's system thoroughly. Calculate wind triangles in under 2 minutes. Update drift measurements every 6 minutes without fail. Trust the numbers absolutely. They climbed into the aircraft at 2,315 hours. The pre-flight checklist took 18 minutes. Engine start at 23:33. Taxi to runway at 23:39. Bennett pushed the throttles forward at precisely 23:43 hours, 4 minutes ahead of schedule. The Halifax lifted off, climbing into darkness. Behind them, spread across 7 airfields, 1,200 bombers began their own takeoff sequences. Time to arrive over target in a compressed stream lasting 47 minutes. Formation details of the bomber stream showed the massive scale of the operation. The stream stretched from first aircraft to last over a distance of 47 miles when fully developed. Average altitude for the force, 18,000 feet, though individual aircraft varied from 16,000 to 20,000. Average speed, 215 miles per hour indicated airspeed, though true airspeed varied with wind and altitude. Separation between aircraft, 500 feet vertical to reduce collision risk, 2 miles horizontal to prevent one aircraft's flak from endangering others. Flight details during the first hour went according to plan. They climbed through cloud layer at 8,000 feet, encountering moderate turbulence that made drift sites difficult but not impossible to use. At 12,000 feet, they entered solid overcast that would persist for the rest of the mission. Brief clear patch at 16,000 feet allowed Smith to grab a quick celestial sight on Polaris, verifying their dead reckoning position. Error, 0.8 miles. Acceptable. Primary cloud deck began at 17,000 feet and extended upward past their cruising altitude of 18,000 feet. Visibility dropped to absolute zero at 2,358 hours, 15 minutes after takeoff. From that moment, Bennett was flying on instruments and mathematics alone. At 12:47 a.m., the first critical call came from the rear gunner, Sergeant William Hayes. "Skipper, cloud deck solid below us. I can see the glow of cities through the clouds, but no distinct ground features. Navigation is going to be entirely on instruments." Bennett acknowledged the report. Standard procedure would be to consider abort at this point. If they couldn't see the ground, they couldn't verify position visually. The entire mission depended on whether Dead Reckoning could maintain accuracy for 387 miles through unmeasured winds. Time since last wind update, 5 minutes 30 seconds. Bennett ordered Smith to take another drift reading immediately, even though they were 30 seconds ahead of the 6-minute schedule. The measurement showed something concerning. Wind had shifted 7 degrees north from forecast. Speed increased to 52 knots from the predicted 45. Smith recalculated the wind triangle using Bennett's tables. New heading required, 086 degrees magnetic instead of the current 083. Course correction, 3 degrees right. The change seemed small, but Bennett understood the mathematics. Distance error, if uncorrected over the next hour, 2.4 miles. That would compound. After 2 hours, 4.8 miles. By the time they reached Ham, the error could exceed 8 miles, making accurate marking impossible. He turned 3 degrees right, resetting the compass heading. Smith marked the time, 12:47:30, and noted the correction in the navigation log. Every decision, every measurement, every calculation documented for post-mission analysis. Enemy force composition. German night fighter strength over the Ruhr Valley included 47 Messerschmitt, Bf M110 aircraft equipped with Liechtenstein radar, 23 Junkers, Ju-88 night fighters, and coordination from 8 Würzburg ground radar stations. The layered defense had destroyed 156 RAF bombers in the previous month. Standard response according to doctrine was to climb above searchlight range, use evasive weaving, and rely on darkness for protection. Bennett did neither. He flew straight and level at exactly 18,000 feet, maintaining precise heading to preserve navigational accuracy. Course deviations would compound position errors. Engagement sequence, range to target, 127 miles. Time to target, 35 minutes at current airspeed. Bennett ordered Smith to begin the final navigation sequence. 6-minute wind updates became 3-minute updates. Every calculation double-checked. H-2S ground mapping radar activated, though its return showed only confused signals in the cloud-obscured industrial landscape. Range, 89 miles. German searchlights activated below the cloud layer, creating a diffused glow, visible even through 4,000 feet of overcast. The flak batteries opened fire. Barrage patterns centered on the predicted approach corridor. Range, 64 miles. Bennett felt the aircraft shudder as explosive shells detonated 200 feet below. Standard procedure called for altitude change. Bennett held course. Smith recalculated wind drift using the new flak burst positions as reference points, triangulating ground position. At 41 miles out, the critical moment arrived. Smith looked up from his calculations. "Sir, H-2S shows returns consistent with Ham, but position is 3.2 miles south of Dead Reckoning calculation." Bennett faced the decision every navigator dreaded: trust the instrument or trust the mathematics. H-2S radar was new technology, installed only 6 weeks earlier. Its accuracy remained unproven in heavy cloud, but Dead Reckoning accumulated errors. 3.2 miles represented a significant discrepancy. He reviewed his wind calculations. 6 updates in the last 36 minutes, each drift measurement taken with care, cross-checks using astrosights when stars were briefly visible. The mathematics showed consistent results. "We trust the Dead Reckoning," Bennett said. "H-2S is confused by ground clutter. The math doesn't lie if you do it correctly." Complication. Number 1, technical failure. At 23 miles from target, the H-2S radar failed completely. The magnetron tube overheated, a common problem with early units. Smith reported the failure at 1:14 a.m. Technical explanation. The H-2S system used a cavity magnetron operating at 3,000 MHz to generate radar pulses. The unit produced 50 kilowatts of peak power, generating enormous heat. Cooling systems frequently failed after 90 minutes of continuous operation, exactly the flight time they had accumulated. Bennett had 3 options. Option 1, abort the marking run and return to base. Consequence, 1,200 following aircraft would have no target markers. Mission failure. Option 2, request another Pathfinder aircraft to take the lead. Consequence, 15-minute delay while they repositioned. Most bombers would run low on fuel. Option 3, continue on dead reckoning alone. Risk accuracy depended entirely on calculation without radar confirmation. He chose option 3. His reasoning was mathematical. Dead reckoning had delivered 1.2-mile average accuracy over 23 previous missions. Radar confirmation was a luxury, not a requirement. The navigation solution existed in the numbers, not the instruments. Execution. Bennett ordered Smith to increase calculation frequency to every 90 seconds for the final approach. They would use wind drift measurements, airspeed indicators, and elapsed time as the only navigation inputs. Smith's hands moved across the navigation table, plotting wind triangles with mechanical precision. Result: partial success. They maintained calculated course, but uncertainty increased. Without radar confirmation, Bennett couldn't know if his wind calculations captured every atmospheric variation. A 5-knot wind. Shift in the final 10 miles would mean 0.8-mile position error. Complication number 2, resource depletion. Bennett checked his flare inventory. Starting load, 120 target indicator flares, 40 photo flash bombs. Current load, 118 target indicators remaining. He dropped 2 markers during the approach for timing verification. Calculation. Time remaining before target, 6 minutes 30 seconds based on dead reckoning. Needed minimum, 8 target indicator flares for effective marking, dropped in pattern over 90 seconds. Reserve required, 20 flares in case wind carried markers off target. The math worked, but barely. Bennett prepared the flare release sequence. Unlike standard bombing, where accuracy mattered within hundreds of feet, target marking required precision within 200 feet. Flares dropped too early would drift downwind. Dropped too late, following bombers would already be committed to their runs. He calculated the release point using wind speed, fall time, and drift angle. At 18,000 feet altitude, target indicators would fall for approximately 120 seconds before detonating at 3,000 feet. During that fall, 52-knot winds would carry them 1.1 miles downwind. Bennett needed to release 1.1 miles upwind of the actual target, accounting for drift. Smith called out the countdown. 3 minutes to calculated release point. Complication number 3. Peak crisis. The worst moment arrived at 1:19 a.m., 90 seconds before planned flare release. Multiple problems converged simultaneously. Problem 1. Flak barrage intensity increased to 47 shells per minute, based on shell burst count. Problem 2. Fuel consumption exceeded calculations by 8% due to evasive maneuvers earlier in the flight. Problem 3. Winds at altitude shifted again, now measuring 58 knots instead of 52 knots. A 6-knot increase in the last 3 minutes. Enemy status. German night fighters had vectored onto the bomber stream. Radio intercepts indicated 12 fighters engaging aircraft 40 miles behind Bennett's position. The defensive controller at Würzburg Station had identified the bomber track and was positioning additional fighters. Standard procedure called for immediate evasive action. Turn 30 degrees off course, climb or descend 2,000 feet. Break the targeting solution. Bennett chose an impossible alternative. He held exact course and altitude, ordered Smith to recalculate the flare release point based on 58-knot winds instead of 52 knots, and increased airspeed by 15 knots to reduce exposure time in the flak zone. Second-by-second execution. One spawn at 19:15, Smith completed new wind triangle calculation. Release point shifted 400 yards upwind. 1:19:30. Bennett adjusted heading by 1 degree to align with new release point. 1 May 1945. Flak burst 60 feet below the aircraft. Shrapnel punctured the port fuel tank. Fuel began streaming. 1:20 spear. Smith armed the target indicator flares. 1:20:15. Bennett verified airspeed, altitude, and heading one final time. 1:20:22. Release. Resolution. 8. Target indicator flares dropped in sequence. 3-second intervals between each release. Bennett counted fall time. At 120 seconds, the flares would detonate, marking the target below the cloud layer where following bombers could see them. Range countdown began. 90 seconds after release, Bennett began a climbing turn to the northwest, clearing the area for the bomber stream behind him. At 105 seconds, Smith reported seeing diffused red glow through the clouds below, indicating flare detonation. At 120 seconds, radio confirmation came from the first bomber in the following stream. Pathfinder, this is main force lead. Target markers visual, red flares and clear pattern, beginning bombing run. Climactic moment. Bennett listened as bomber after bomber reported visual contact with his markers. The calculated position, based purely on dead reckoning through zero visibility conditions, had placed flares within visible range of the target. Results: enemy losses. Osram factory sustained direct hits from 847 bombs. Production reduced by 73% for 6 months. Friendly casualties: 23 aircraft lost from the 1,200 bomber force, a 1.9% loss rate compared to the 7.4% average for the previous month. Time elapsed from first flare release to final bomber departure, 47 minutes. Resources remaining: 110 target indicator flares, sufficient for abort and remarking if needed. Bennett landed at RAF Wycombe at 3:22 a.m., 3 hours 39 minutes after takeoff. He climbed out of the Halifax, his flight suit soaked with sweat, despite 40-degree temperatures at altitude. The ground crew swarmed, counting damage. 23 shrapnel holes in the fuselage, port fuel tank punctured and drained, H-2S radar unit burned out. Starboard engine oil pressure reading 15% below normal, but the aircraft had flown the mission. The target had been marked. The bomber stream had found their aiming point in conditions that should have made the operation impossible. The crew chief, Sergeant William Palmer, examined the navigation logs. He found Smith's wind calculations, 47 separate drift measurements taken during the mission, each cross-checked and verified. He found Bennett in the operations room, reviewing reconnaissance photos transmitted from aircraft equipped with cameras. 23 holes in the fuselage, Palmer said. How many wind calculations? 47, Bennett replied. One every 6 minutes, then every 3 minutes, then every 90 seconds for the final approach. You navigated through complete zero visibility using mathematics? The group captain asked, entering the room. Palmer consulted the navigation log. Time over target, within 90 seconds of calculation. Position accuracy, post-mission photo reconnaissance showed flares fell 0.4 miles from intended target center. 0.4 miles, he said. Standard navigation in these conditions averages 6-mile error. You achieved 15 times better accuracy. The group captain looked at Bennett. You led 1,200 aircraft through conditions that should have scattered them across 50 square miles. Your markers were accurate enough that 84% of bombs hit within 1 mile of target. News spread through Bomber Command before dawn. By 6 a.m., every navigator in 4 Group wanted to know Bennett's method. By noon, group captains from 1, 3, and 5 groups requested briefings. By evening, Air Chief Marshal Harris sent representatives from High Wycombe. Air Vice-Marshal Robert Sonby, Senior Air Staff Officer, arrived personally at 8 p.m. He found Bennett calculating wind patterns for the following night's operations. Interview began immediately. Can you teach this? Sonby asked. To navigators with strong mathematical background, yes, Bennett said. But it requires discipline. Wind drift measurements every 6 minutes for 4-hour missions means 40 measurements. Each must be accurate. One lazy calculation compounds into miles of error. How many could you train? Sonby asked. Give me 12 weeks and 20 navigator candidates. I'll deliver a Pathfinder force that can mark targets in any weather condition. You have 8 weeks, Sonby ordered, and I'm giving you an entire squadron. Effective immediately, you're forming the Pathfinder force. 8 Group Bomber Command, reporting directly to me. Training program. Bennett spent the next 8 weeks developing what became known as the Bennett Navigation Method. Duration of training: 56 days of intensive instruction, 8 hours daily. Core principles. Principle 1, measure wind drift every 6 minutes without exception. Reasoning, navigation errors grow exponentially. Frequent updates prevent compound errors. Principle 2, trust mathematics over visual reference. Reasoning, human perception fails in darkness and cloud. Numbers remain constant. Principle 3, prepare calculations on the ground. Reasoning, Cognitive load in combat reduces calculation accuracy. Pre-computed tables eliminate in-flight errors. The method faced resistance. Criticism. 1. Too time-intensive for combat operations. Criticism 2. Required mathematical ability beyond typical navigator training. Criticism 3. Assumed wind patterns remain predictable, which they didn't. But statistics didn't lie. Bennett's method, developed over 23 combat missions, had achieved 1.2-mile average accuracy. Standard RAF navigation achieved 5.1-mile average. The difference meant mission success versus mission failure. In September 1942, before tactics spread widely, target accuracy across Bomber Command measured 22% of bombs within 5 miles. By January 1943, after Pathfinder Force adoption of Bennett's methods, accuracy reached 61% of bombs within 5 miles, a 177% improvement in bombing accuracy. Percentage reduction in navigator casualties, 37%. Reduction in aircraft losses to navigation errors, 64%. Primary success metrics. August 1942, German industrial targets completed 68% of planned production despite bombing campaigns. January 1943, completion dropped to 41%. Bennett's navigation methods disrupted German industry so effectively that 1/3 of production capacity was lost to accurate targeting. Training results. Bennett personally trained 97 navigators between August 1942 and March 1943. Each received 56 days of intensive instruction. Washout rate 23%. Common reasons for failure: inability to maintain calculation discipline under pressure, mathematical errors exceeding 2%, unwillingness to trust numbers over instinct. Graduates accounted for 71% of successful target marking operations in European theater between January 1943 and May 1945. Enemy response. The Luftwaffe noticed the change immediately. German intelligence reports from October 1942 mentioned increased accuracy of RAF night bombing. Documents captured after the war showed German analysis of the new targeting methods. Hauptmann Heinrich Prinz zu Sein-Wittgenstein, who had achieved 83 night fighter victories, engaged a Pathfinder aircraft on November 3, 1942. He used standard tactic, approach from below and behind, cannon fire into engines. Except the Pathfinder didn't take evasive action. The aircraft held steady course at exact altitude, making it an easier target. Wittgenstein destroyed the aircraft, but noted in his combat report, enemy maintained precise heading despite engagement. Navigation appeared more important than survival, unusual tactical priority. By December 1942, the Luftwaffe had lost 89 night fighters attempting to intercept Pathfinder aircraft. German command ordered tactical change, engage main bomber force instead of lead markers. That marked a turning point. The Luftwaffe conceded that preventing accurate marking was impossible. Better to reduce the number of aircraft that could use those markers. After the war, historians studied Bennett's navigation innovation with scientific precision. The principles were incorporated into doctrine across multiple nations. United States adopted dead reckoning frequency standards in 1944, required wind updates every 10 minutes minimum. Soviet Union incorporated mathematical navigation into training curriculum in 1946. Royal Air Force made Bennett's method standard for all navigator training in 1943. The concept spread beyond aviation. United States Navy submarine navigation in Pacific Theater. British Royal Navy convoy routing in North Atlantic. Commercial aviation, transatlantic route planning. Modern military forces use automated versions in GPS-denied environments. When satellite navigation fails, crews revert to dead reckoning with frequency updates. The same principle Bennett proved in 1942. Analysis conducted by RAF Bomber Command Operational Research Section in 1944 showed clear statistical impact. August 1942 to December 1942, average target error 5.1 miles. January 1943 to May 1945, average target error 1.8 miles. A 65% reduction in navigation error. The difference, systematic application of Bennett's navigation method. Enemy records provided additional perspective. Captured German industrial reports showed production impacts. Document recovered from Speer Ministry archives dated March 1943 stated, "Bombing accuracy has increased dramatically since January. Previously, area disruption was manageable. Current precision targeting destroys specific facilities, creating cascading production failures." Internal Luftwaffe analysis attributed 47% of increased bomber effectiveness to improved navigation and target marking, specifically mentioning Pathfinder techniques. Bennett's combat career with the Pathfinder Force ended in December 1943. He never flew combat missions again after that date. The rest of the war, he served as Air Officer Commanding 8 Group, managing Pathfinder operations from the ground. His influence extended far beyond personal achievement. Conservative estimates suggested his navigation methods saved 8,200 aircrew lives by reducing losses from navigation errors and improving mission effectiveness, which shortened the war. Post-war, he returned to civilian life in July 1945, immediately resuming commercial aviation, founded British South American Airways, 1946. Flew routes across the Atlantic, using the navigation methods he'd perfected during the war. The airline operated for 3 years before merging with BOAC. Family details: married Lai Fu Ngor, a Swiss-Chinese pilot he'd met in 1935. 2 children, continued flying until age 62. He rarely discussed the war publicly. In 1967, journalists from the RAF Historical Branch found him at his home in Essex. He declined most interview requests. "I did what needed doing," he said. "Navigation is mathematics. Apply it correctly and you get correct results. Nothing heroic about arithmetic." Group Captain Hamish Mahadi, who served under Bennett in the Pathfinder Force, explained the impact in a 1971 interview. "Before him, we thought navigation was part art, part science, part luck. He taught us it was pure mathematics applied with discipline. Simple concept. Changed everything. Every navigator who survived because their 6-minute wind-up dates kept them on course. Every bomb that hit target because the markers were accurate. Every mission that succeeded in zero visibility. That's Bennett's legacy." Numbers that quantified his impact. 97 navigators personally trained. 8,200 personnel estimated saved through reduced losses. 2,147 successful Pathfinder missions, using his methods between September 1942 and May 1945. 65% improvement in navigation accuracy across Bomber Command. Air Vice-Marshal Donald Bennett died on September 15, 1986, at age 76. The Times of London obituary mentioned his Distinguished Flying Cross, his role founding British South American Airways, and his service in Parliament from 1945 to 1950. One paragraph covered war service. The obituary didn't mention the night of August 18, 1942. Didn't mention leading 1,200 aircraft through zero visibility conditions. Didn't mention that his navigation method reduced bombing errors by 65%. Didn't mention that the Pathfinder Force techniques he developed became standard doctrine. Didn't mention the 8,200 lives saved. Funeral held at the Cambridge Crematorium, attended by 340 people. No military honor guard. No formation flyover. The officiant didn't know about the August mission. Didn't know about the mathematics that changed strategic bombing. Didn't know he'd revolutionized navigation warfare, but former Pathfinders knew. Veterans gathered the night before at the RAF Club in London, raised glasses. Wing Commander John Searby, age 74, who had flown 23 Pathfinder missions, gave the toast. Don Bennett never thought he was special. He'd tell you he just did the mathematics correctly, but his mathematics saved thousands of us. Every bomber crew that found their target because Pathfinders marked it accurately. Every navigator who survived because 6-minute wind-up dates kept them out of flak zones. Every mission that succeeded in impossible weather because someone trusted the numbers over their fear. That's his legacy. Not just the 97 navigators he trained, the culture change, the proof that discipline and mathematics defeat chaos and guesswork. Modern legacy remains embedded in military training worldwide. The Bennett navigation method appears in RAF Navigator Training Manuals, Section 4, Fundamental Techniques. United States Air Force includes dead reckoning frequency standards in combat survival training. NATO standardization agreements specify navigation update intervals for GPS-denied operations, directly descended from principles Bennett established. Commercial aviation applies the concepts in oceanic crossing procedures, when aircraft fly beyond radar coverage over the Atlantic or Pacific. Crews maintain position using dead reckoning with frequent updates, the same principle Bennett proved viable in combat. Current recommended navigation practice for military operations in electronic warfare environments, where GPS signals are jammed, follows doctrine Bennett created. Update position frequently. Trust mathematics over instruments. Prepare calculations in advance. Simple principles, proven under fire in 1942. August 18, 1942, lasted 3 hours and 39 minutes. 1 navigator, 0 visibility. 1,200 aircraft, depending on his calculations. When mathematical precision defeated German defenses, when discipline overcame uncertainty, when one Australian pilot proved that navigation was science, not art, Air Vice-Marshal Donald Tyndall Bennett led the first Pathfinder mission through 0 visibility conditions on August 18, 1942. Marked targets with 0.4-mile accuracy when standard error measured 6 miles. Trained 97 navigators to his methods. Changed strategic bombing doctrine forever. Reduced bomber losses by 64% through improved navigation. Saved an estimated 8,200 lives. Not because he was special, because he trusted mathematics. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support preserves these histories. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We honor courage by remembering names. Thank you for keeping their stories alive.